Assalamu alaikum, it's Tim here from Urban Dunia, and today I am bringing you a special vlog about the Australian bushfire crisis. It occurred to me just recently actually that bushfires are a phenomenon that occur or tend to occur only in certain parts of the world, and therefore they're not very well understood by a lot of people outside of those areas. On Instagram, I put out a poll asking if people would be interested in seeing a vlog about the bushfire crisis in Australia. The answer was overwhelmingly positive, so here we are. In today's vlog, we are going to be taking a look at the role that bushfires play in Australia, how they begin, what happens during a bushfire in Australia, and how Australia responds to bushfires. Bushfires can happen at any time of year in Australia, but they tend to be most common in the summer months of December, January and February. That's when the forests are at their hottest and driest, and southeastern Australia, along with southern Europe and California in the United States, becomes one of the most fire-prone parts of the world. Fire has happened naturally in Australia for millennia. It's part of the ecosystem in Australia. Plants grow, they die off. And then as the plants die off, the dead foliage falls to the base of the forest floor and it becomes what's known as fuel or fuel load. That builds up over time. Eventually, during hot, dry weather, a fire burns right through the forest, clearing it out, and then within a year, new shoots appear. The forest regenerates, the ecosystem is renewed, and the process starts again. This cycle seems to have no set time frame. It depends a lot on the weather conditions, human activity, and so on. But major fires seem to affect a particular area once every 20 to 40 years. Fires start for a variety of reasons. The most common reason is dry lightning. This is when lightning strikes in a storm that brings no rain, which is fairly common during the hot summers of Australia. Electricity wires sparking or falling during high winds is the second major cause, followed by accidental ignition. This could be a cigarette butt dropped out of a car window, a barbecue near bushland, or perhaps agricultural activities. One of the least common but most controversial causes of bushfire in Australia is arson. Fires have been intentionally lit for a variety of reasons, but they run the whole gamut, for everything from the mundane troublemaking right through to someone who was denied a job with the fire brigade, so intentionally set fire to the forest as some kind of revenge. There is a lot of forest in Australia that can burn without any major human impact, but occasionally it approaches towns and villages or the fringes of a major city, and that's when it really starts to make the news. Sydney particularly has national parks within the city limits, and a fire in one of those national parks is a nightmare scenario which would see flames racing up to people's doorsteps. Growing up in Australia on the fringes of Sydney, as I did, bushfire was just part of our lifestyle. It's something that didn't really happen that often, but we knew that it could happen and we'd have to be prepared in case it did. I guess you could liken it to earthquakes in Japan or South America, or perhaps floods in parts of Europe. Not something that would deter you from living in a particular area, but something that you were aware of, and definitely something that you knew that you had to be prepared for if and when the worst did eventuate. When Sydney experienced huge bushfires in 1994, we were put on alert one time, so my family enacted our bushfire plan, as it's called. We packed a suitcase and we spent the night, or at least the evening, in another part of the city. As I recall, we were having fish and chips on Narrabeen Beach. I have to stress here that we, at the time, were living 2 streets away from open forest, so if a bushfire did approach, then we would have been right in the firing line. Other parts of the city were covered in smoke, but they weren't in the danger that we potentially could have been. Thankfully, we were okay that time, but other parts of Sydney were not so lucky. When 4 of Sydney's national parks caught fire in 1994, 168 homes were destroyed and 4 people were killed as close as 10 kilometres from the city centre. Because bushfire is so common in Australia, there have long been warning systems in place, such as the roadside fire danger rating boards, telling residents how likely a fire is on any given day. The fire danger rating is calculated by a range of measurements, including temperature, humidity, the amount of moisture in the forest, the wind speed, and the amount of dead foliage or fuel is lying in the bushland. On days of high danger, total fire bans are enforced, meaning no one is allowed to light a fire in a designated region. Having a barbecue in a park or starting a campfire are all punishable criminal offences on total fire ban days. However, in 2009, the conversation about bushfires changed when Australia's worst ever bushfire tragedy killed 173 people on one day in and around Melbourne. On what became known as Black Saturday, the temperature peaked at 48 degrees Celsius, humidity dropped to 6%, and the wind was blowing at around 100 kilometers per hour. A total fire ban was in force, and residents had been pre-warned that fires were likely. But when the wind brought down electrical wires in an area with a high fuel load north of Melbourne, nearby residents had no time to flee. So fast was the fire moving that many people were still stuck in traffic when the fire overran their escape routes. A major investigation found that the victims probably would have been safer in their homes than in their vehicles, whose tires melted and windows shattered. It also found that the fire was so hot it began to create its own weather conditions, a firestorm. As the day cooled, the wind in and around the fire actually picked up, forming hurricane-like conditions, with fire jumping through the air like a tornado. Burning ash and even dead birds were swept up into the sky and then rained down on other areas up to 20 kilometers away, setting off new fires. Perhaps the biggest revelation of the Black Saturday investigation was this, that even though the victims had been warned about conditions in advance, most of them had been waiting to see smoke as a signal to evacuate, when actually it was already too late. A new warning system was developed for data indicating catastrophic conditions, that is, to leave the area the day before the fire, because firefighters are almost powerless in the face of conditions like those that prevailed on Black Saturday. Australia's new warning system begins the day before the fire, telling people to evacuate for their own safety. In the case where people choose to stay, warnings come in 3 levels. Advice, meaning a low level of danger. Watch and act, meaning that the fire is moving and could escalate quickly. And then an emergency, meaning that the fire is imminent. Like Japan's earthquake warning system, the warnings are sent out by SMS, on television and on radio.
This emergency warning is being issued for Anglers Rest, Benambra, Bingo Mungie.
The emergency warning contains information for people who are in the fire's path.
January. You are in danger and need to act immediately to survive. The safest option is to take shelter indoors immediately. It is too late to leave. You should move indoors. Protect yourself by wearing long sleeves and trousers made from pure cotton or wool. Wear leather boots. Bring your pets inside.
It also contains information for people who are travelling or are outside when the fire hits.
If you are travelling, do not enter the warning area. U-turn to safety. If you are currently driving, slow down and turn on your headlights. Smoke will make it difficult to see. If you are caught in fire in your car, park behind a solid structure to block the fire's heat or pull over to a cleared area. Try to position the car towards the approaching fire. Turn on your hazard
If you would like to hear a full version of that warning, you can click the link in the video description. I recorded this recently when I was driving on a highway near a fire. This warning system has been instrumental in preventing an even greater tragedy than the one that has already occurred during this season's fires. The numbers from this year's season are staggering. At least 5,900 homes have been destroyed. 72,000 square kilometers have been burned. Approximately 1 billion animals have been killed, but only 29 people have died. Now, that's certainly not to downplay the tragedy of the past 4 months, but it stands in stark contrast to the Black Saturday fires, in which almost 6 times as many people perished in just one afternoon. So the system seems to be saving lives, but on the other hand, this year's fires are the worst that Australia has experienced in the history of record keeping. Maximum temperature records have been broken. Eastern Australia continues to suffer through one of its longest ever droughts. Cities hundreds of kilometres from the fires have been blanketed in thick clouds of smoke for days. And now, in January, it seems as if the fires will continue until several days of heavy rainfall is enough to extinguish them. This year's fires have also been exacerbated by where they have happened. They have taken place in all 8 states and territories of Australia, but the worst of it has been concentrated in a 2,000 kilometre area between Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Some of the fires have been 900 kilometres in circumference, and the smoke has blanketed Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra for weeks. Some of the towns hit by fire have only got one road leading in and out, meaning that when the fires reached those roads, towns were effectively isolated until the fires subsided. This was the case in the tiny village of Malakuta, for example, where at 8 a.m. on New Year's Eve, the temperature was at 49 degrees Celsius and the fire raced towards the town, fanned by high wind. 4,000 people were huddling on the beach as the only escape route had been blocked. There was too much smoke for helicopters to land, and witnesses described the sky turning blood red and then pitch black, the sound of koalas screaming as they burned alive, and the local fire brigade telling people to duck their heads under the water as wave after wave of embers rained down on them. The conversation has also turned to future fire management practices. Climate change has been a key topic of discussion, and protests last week across several major cities urged the government to take action on human impacts on the environment. The bushfire crisis has also become a political issue, with the Prime Minister verbally abused when visiting a fire-ravaged community in New South Wales. Several government ministers drawing criticism for taking holidays during the crisis, and allegations that funding to firefighters was drastically reduced in recent months as part of a cost-cutting exercise. Many of the firefighters, including many of those who have died, were volunteers. Another touchy subject is controlled burning or backburning. This is when fire authorities intentionally set fire to the dry fuel load in a forest during favourable conditions, like in winter. The fire is controlled, then extinguished, so when a real bushfire occurs, there's little left to burn. It's controversial because it can be seen as interfering with the natural process, and there is always the potential for a controlled burn to get out of control. This is where the biggest divisions lie, the politics around climate change and human interference with the environment. However, I would suggest that most people can agree that humans can often have a negative impact on the environment, even if it's just in terms of pollution and destruction of natural habitats. I would also suggest that most people would agree that if it was possible to reduce the number of houses, animals, and lives being destroyed by fire each year, that would be a desirable outcome. It's clear that bushfire will probably always occur in Australia, and with an upgraded and effective warning system, the discussion is now about management or risk reduction. The crisis in Australia appeared to reach a climax in the first week of 2020, in the immediate wake of some of the worst fires of the season, and the pressure on authorities from the public to take action on fire management peaked. The two questions which remain are, 1. As conversations about the environment become increasingly politicized, will it be possible to reach some kind of consensus on the best course of action to take? And secondly, as the current crisis subsides, will the public eventually lose interest and the will to change things until the next fire season begins encroaching on their lives? If you would like to do something to contribute to the bushfire relief efforts, I personally recommend the following charities and institutions. Links to their websites are listed in the video description below. Thank you for watching. Hit the subscribe button for more travel videos from around the world.